Well, look, I think they are fit for purpose to the extent that they have good people there. We saw that in the fact that their investigation into Richard Freeman, the Team Sky doctor, it was their discovery of the testosterone that led to his ban last week. I think the issue here is that what this comes down to, in my opinion, is funding, and the fact that UKAD is operating on revenue from the government, from the taxpayer, from us, of about £9 million a year. And as they explained in their statement, when I put these statistics to them this week, they are trying to police over 40 sports. And every test that they do, David Howman, the chairman of the AIU, was explaining this the other day out here in Budapest. Every test costs about £1,000, right? So you've only got so much money to spend. And I do think that is at the root of this. It has frustrated me for years. I've said it on this program before that you know we talk and write about a sporting landscape in the UK alone that has billions of pounds coming into it, not least through television revenue, and yet we're spending, you know, what a championship football club will spend on.
But this is why the argument must be. I understand the resistance to the sentiment that it's not fit for purpose, because when it does operate and it does test, it produces outcomes. But the fact that it doesn't have the revenue model, whether DCMS are giving it enough funding or whether it has got the teeth to turn to the individual sports and say you've got to start funding some of this yourselves, if it's not achieving that, if its CEO that's running UKAD isn't achieving that, then he is not fit for purpose by its very definition. Because I've spent a lot of time, as you know, Matt, looking at the boxing landscape. 57 out of competition tests for boxers over the last 18 months is preposterous.
Yeah. Well, boxing's like the Wild West, if truth be told. But you know, look, they should be lobbying harder. I think they are lobbying harder. But I don't think actually any of this money should be coming from the taxpayer anyway. It shouldn't be coming from the government. It shouldn't be on the DCMS to provide £9 million to make sure that sport is as clean as it possibly can be. That we're protecting the integrity of sport. There should be some form of taxation that means that the Premier League pay. But
that's on one sport, though, Matt. I agree with you. I don't think it should be the taxpayer of the DCMS. But when you're looking at certain sports, and you use football as an example, yes, of course, it's preposterous that football shouldn't have to fund every single indication of its own testing regime, and they should be prolific. When you start to get into athletics that doesn't have the revenue streams, and when you get into certain parts of boxing where only the headline fights are making the money, and you're talking about the small hall fights are not, you've still got a situation where the funding gap is not going to be bridged as easily as you and I might like it to be by the sports themselves.
Yeah, but I just think it should all go into a pot. So that you do actually say to, I've used this example before, England netball, look, just, you know, give us £5,000, you know, but you do say to the Premier League, give us 20 million. So I just think it should go into a pot, because I think it's in the interest of everyone that we have a national anti-doping agency. And I don't think there's an issue with retaining its independence if you do that, but you have a national anti-doping agency that is properly funded and sport.
But with respect, Matt, again, if you've got football spending £5 billion a year on wages and paying £2 billion of that into the exchequer, more than any other sport, it's already paying its way. And you're going to sit there with Premier League chairmen saying, we want you to give us 20 million a year, $1 million each club, to go and fund other sports. You're going to get a pushback.
Well, you make a brilliant point that they're already paying a lot in terms of in tax. But it's peanuts, though, Simon, for football. That is what we're talking about here, is peanuts. You know, it's 9 million a year that is being spent to police 40 sports.
Do we know, Matt, if it was running properly across all the sports? Because if you take that down to £1,000 a test, and that's the most basic denomination, right? That takes away the administration costs of all the different personnel that are in UKAD. The maximum amount of tests you can do across the 40 sports is 9,000 tests. So I suggest it's probably closer to 5,000 tests. I would suspect that in order to police the sport properly across all 40 sports, we're going to be into the areas of 50,000 tests a year is required. And the quantum of investment in that is going to be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 million a year. Not 9.
It doesn't need to, you know, it doesn't need to compute to that degree, because actually it's not just about doing loads of tests, because that doesn't actually work. If you speak to the guys at the AIU, who are absolutely leading the way, they've set a new standards for anti-doping. They've got 184 Kenyans in the last 6 years. It's extraordinary what they're doing, and it's actually embarrassing everybody else. As David Howman said the other day, other sports they are playing at it. They are not fit for purpose, their anti-doping programs, and he included football in that. It's not just about doing loads of tests, but come back to what Jim was reading out the story I've written today. It is a concern that the elite, i.e. the people that are actually competing in a world championship in Eugene last year, 15, I think it is, of the 73 athletes who went there had not had a knock at the door in the previous 10 months that they'd been preparing for the World Championship.
Have you any idea, Matt, what the level of testing is where you are in Budapest at these current World Athletics Championships?
Well, look, again, Jim, they'll be testing after every race, but that's kind of... only the idiots get caught at a major championship. It's testing in competition isn't that effective, because you've got to do something ridiculously wrong. And of course it does happen. It happened with CJ Uja in the Olympics, and the British sprint relay team was stripped of their silver medal. So it does happen. You do still need to test at a major championship. If you didn't, everyone would turn up, juice to their eyeballs.
Yeah, sure.
But
sure.
It's and we won't know the data. And there are countries that are worse. I think the Irish team, who had a similar sized team, I think over 50% of their athletes hadn't been tested in the 10 months. So there are other examples that are more.
What does intelligence-led testing actually mean, Matt? Does it mean using data or evaluating performances from athletes? What does it actually mean?
Some of it's using data, and another story we wrote this week is the fact there's been a major breakthrough in how they're now testing for steroids. This whole athlete biological passport, since 2009, they've only been using a urine test to try and spot steroid use. They've now got a blood test that's going to be far more effective. Intelligence-led testing means that you've actually got people that know what they're looking at, Simon. It means that they know the sport, they understand the sport. They might see spikes in performance. They might see an athlete who last year wasn't actually very good, who's suddenly smashing it out of the park. And the thing is, and you might think that's obvious, but actually you've got to have the resources to have investigators, and this is what the AIU have. Yeah. They have investigators. They have ex-Interpol officers who are really watching their sport, and they do focus on the elite. Their testing pool is predominantly focused on the top 10 in every sport, in every event. So they really do focus on that. But then they also focus, their testing pool in marathon running, because there's so much doping in road running, because that's where the big money is. That you win the Chicago Marathon, you win hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there's actually, in marathon running, there's an elite testing pool that actually extends to about 150 runners. So that they're just doing it the right way. And I do think UKAD does need to look at what the AIU are doing, and I do think just about every other anti-doping agency and sport in the world needs to look at what the AIU are doing, because they're so damn good at it. But there is cause for concern. But I really do believe that in the UK, it's a lack of resource. 9 million is a disgrace. We are not taking it seriously. We are not trying to make sure that when we send teams around the world representing the UK, we are not doing enough to make sure that they're doing it properly.
Okay, Matt, listen, thank you so much for joining us from Budapest. Matt, no doubt, thrilled as we all were that Josh Kerr, the Scotsman, went on to win the gold in the 1500 metres, which was a terrific effort by Josh.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.